Most of you know this about me, but some of you don't. I like to drive. I enjoy long road trips because it gives me lots of time to think. There are a few distractions on the road when you're driving. I'm not looking at screens or doing other projects. I'm not making 100 phone calls or writing sermons. I'm just focused on the road, listening to music and getting inspired for the future. I love that. It's one of my favorite things. One of the things I like to do when I'm driving is think back over my life and take inventory of my favorite moments. I think it's important to do that from time to time. So many times we tend to focus on our worst memories, our darkest moments. And when you do that, it puts you in a negative frame of mind. It keeps you in a loop of regret and despair. If you focus on bad things, it keeps you focused on bad things. If I allow my mind to stay focused on my worst moments, my biggest mistakes, the ways that I've hurt others or the way others have hurt me and let me down, it shapes my entire way of thinking. And when you're driving on a long road trip and you do that, it ruins your trip. It ruins the whole thing. So I like to intentionally focus on the best memories because it helps me have faith for the future. It helps me dream. And man, I love to dream. In fact, one of my road trips from Phoenix, I've been back and forth to Phoenix 14 or 15 times, taking kids back and forth to school over the years. And on one of my trips from Phoenix to Little Rock, I was dreaming of the future, and I made the decision to start asking God to show us where He wanted us to serve as pastors. And that road trip eventually led us here to you. I'm so thankful for that trip. I'm thankful for the way that God spoke to me during that time. When life isn't the way you want it to be, it's easy to settle into patterns of thinking that make you feel helpless. Sometimes we face big, huge challenges that they seem insurmountable. They seem huge. And it looks like there's no way out. And maybe you've been there. Anybody face something that seemed like there was no way out? Maybe you're there right now. You may be asking yourself, how long is this going to go on? How long am I going to suffer? When will my moment come? When will it be my turn? I see other people having their prayers answered. When will God answer my prayers? Well, I want you to know I'm so glad that you're here today. I'm so glad that you're watching online. I've got a word for you today that I believe could change your life. I do literally believe that this word could change your life. There are two stories from the Gospels that I want to look at today because I believe God wants to show us something. In both stories, the men needed miracles. Both of them needed a miracle from God. Their situations seemed hopeless. And the great news is that in these stories, both of these men received miracles. They were both healed in an amazing way. But there's some important differences between these stories that I want to take a look at today. And in the first one, it's found in John chapter 5. Jesus and his disciples went to Jerusalem for one of the feasts, one of the Jewish feasts. And they walked into a place called Bethesda. You may not know this, but the word Bethesda means house of mercy. Bethesda truly was a house of mercy on this day. Bethesda was an interesting place. It was a pool. It was a community pool. Pools were a little different back then than they are now. Our culture thinks of something completely different when we're going to the pool. For us, it's a swimming pool. It's a place to bring the kids and have fun. You lay out, you get some sun. It's happy and cheerful. Pools can be loud, chaotic places. Music is blaring and kids are laughing and playing. Somebody's diving off the diving board. There's a lot going on. In this case, though, the pool was a place that was meant to be serene. It served a different purpose. In this case, an aqueduct had been built to collect water from a natural spring, and there had been built an upper pool and a lower pool divided by a barrier. This place had been here for hundreds of years. Probably at some point way back, this natural spring was a place that shepherds would stop and water their flock, but eventually it had been built into what it was at this time. It's likely that this had been altered some during the time when the Greeks were in charge, in rule over this area. During the reign of the Greeks, their religious beliefs became part of Jewish culture. It was something that scholars called Hellenization. And what it means is that Greeks would impose their culture on the people that they ruled. Greeks worshiped many gods, and one of their gods was a god of healing. And during the peak of their empire, the Greeks built healing centers all throughout their kingdom that was centered around pools of water. This place would have been a perfect site for one of those places. Colonnades had been built around these pools. Colonnades, basically, think of a large stone porch. It's a covered porch intended to create a place for people to rest in the shade next to the pool. People who were sick would come to this pool and they would bathe. They would drink the water. They would sleep inside the walls of this pool, hoping to be healed. The King James Version of John chapter 5 says that an angel of the Lord would come down and stir the waters. Now you may notice, if you have a different translation, that verse 4, is not there in other translations. And the reason is because that verse is not found in some of the oldest manuscripts that we have. But apparently, it's what the people believed. The people believed that an angel came down and stirred the water, and if a person got into the water, the first person who made it to the water would be healed. Now that's quite a competition, isn't it? It seems a little cruel to me. Hey everybody, it's miracle time. Everybody get in the water. Everybody scrambles to the water. Okay, miracle time's over. Sorry, you're out of luck. Better luck next time. Lots of people knew the story about the angel stirring the water. And lots of people believed that story. Had anybody actually been healed there? Who was healed? What were they healed of? We don't know. But we do know the people believed that they could be healed in that water. And people came from all around. And apparently, people regularly jumped into that water when they saw it moving. This is one of the reasons I'm so excited about praying that God will work miracles in this place. I'm praying for God to work miracles in my life and in yours. I'm praying that this church will be a place where miracles are common. Why? Because people are hungry to see the power of God at work. People are hungry to see the power of God at work in the lives of people around them and in their own lives. People are hungry to see God at work. They're hungry, and they're far more open to the supernatural than we think that they are. People are hungry to see God at work. The people who came to this pool were people at the end of the rope. They were unwanted. They were a burden to society. This was a hopeless place. And what do you know? One day Jesus came walking into a hopeless place. There was a man there at the pool that day who was so sick that he couldn't walk. He was weak and he was frail. We don't know how long he had been there by this pool. We don't even know what was wrong with him. We just know that he had been sick like this for 38 years. So sick that he couldn't walk for 38 years. Can you imagine that? 38 years of not being able to walk. 38 years of being dependent on other people around him. 38 years of feeling like there was no hope. Now look what happened. When Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Now that seems like an odd question, doesn't it? Do you want to get well? It may even seem a little insensitive. After all, it's an invalid lying by a pool, obviously, where people believe that the water contains power to heal them. But here's the truth. Sometimes you suffer with problems and challenges for so long that it becomes your identity. You can struggle with the same thing for so long that you can begin to see yourself through the label of that thing that you've been struggling with. You're no longer just a person who loves the Lord and goes to church, but you're a person who loves the Lord and goes to church and you're troubled with fill in the blank. And you carry that through all your life and you see yourself identified through it. You've been asking everybody to pray for you for so long that if God did actually work a miracle in your life, you wouldn't know what to pray about anymore. You've been seeing yourself through the lens of that terrible thing that happened to you a long time ago, and you've labeled yourself by that terrible thing that happened in your life, and you have forgotten that God has a plan for you, That God has a desire and a design for you. And that's why Jesus asked this man the question, do you want to be healed? And look at what he said in response. He said, sir, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred and I'm trying to get in. Someone else goes down ahead of me. Notice, this man didn't really answer Jesus' question. He didn't say, well, yes, of course, Jesus, I want to be healed. Can you heal me? Do you have some answer or some key? Jesus asked what he wanted, and the man immediately started telling his story. Immediately started telling the story of why it hadn't happened. He immediately started listing his excuses for why he couldn't be healed, why his life couldn't change. And that's what happens sometimes when you allow your identity to get wrapped up in the thing that you're struggling with. All you can see is the obstacles. All you can see is the problems. All you can think of are the excuses, the reasons why you haven't seen change in your life and why you probably won't. What the man didn't know was that none of his excuses mattered in this moment. What the man didn't realize is the story he was telling Jesus was irrelevant to this moment. The answer to every one of his problems was standing right in front of him, but he was completely unaware. He didn't know who Jesus was. He had no idea. Even though dozens of people were always following Jesus around, pressing in, wanting something, even hundreds of people at times were pressing in on Jesus, wanting something for him, this man was oblivious. He had no idea who it was that he was talking to. He was focused on the water. He was focused on how unfair his situation was. He was focused on how rude the people around him and how uncaring they were. He was focused on everything else except Jesus. This man had become a victim. He had begun to see himself through the lens of his problem, and his problem had become his identity, and it tainted his perspective on everything around him. He'd put all his faith in a superstition left over from another time when people worshiped false gods. He camped out beside that pool, not really even believing that he would ever be able to receive a miracle, because that was just the best plan that he could come up with. But then one day, Jesus walked in. Jesus walked in. I've known so many people like this through the years. No matter how much wisdom and encouragement you share with them, there's always a reason why it doesn't apply to them. Oh no, my situation's different, Pastor Brad. There's always an excuse. There's always a story. And I just want to say something today. If that's you, please hear me. It's time to stop telling your story. It's time to stop listening to the reasons why your life can't change. Why? Because Jesus is near. Jesus is near. He's as close as the mention of his name. He's as close as the prayer of agreement. Jesus is near. He's right here with you, and he has all the power that you need to set you free. Verse 8, Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." At once the man was cured. He picked up his mat and he walked. There was no production. There was no big prayer. No one was binding the spirit of infirmity in the room. He was healed by the power of Jesus. And here's a couple of quick observations from this story that I want to share with you. First of all, this man was not healed because of his faith. He wasn't. That much should be obvious. This man had such a low level of faith. It was about as low as it gets. And the little bit of faith that he had was placed in the wrong thing. His faith was in the pool of water. And some of you have been taught that if you aren't healed, it's because you don't have enough faith. In other words, it's all up to you. Whether or not God will answer your prayer is all up to whether or not you have enough faith. It's pretty hard to make that case in this story, isn't it? It's pretty hard to make the case that faith is what makes a person healed. Is faith important? Does faith play a role in receiving your miracle? It absolutely does. But I'm just telling you, in this case, this guy didn't have any. It's not a formula. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's not a matter of putting the quarter into the machine and saying the magic words and having the right feeling in your heart so that God will do what you're asking him to do. Listen to me. Jesus sees you just like he saw the man by the pool that day. And in his mercy, Jesus has a miracle in mind for you. He has a miracle in mind for you. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face. He's got a miracle in mind for you. So, he wasn't healed because of his faith. Not only was this man not healed because of his faith, but this man was not healed because he deserved it. That's pretty obvious from the story too when you keep reading. He hadn't done anything to make himself worthy of a miracle from Jesus. In fact, Jesus indicated later on that the opposite was true. Look at what he said. He found him later in verse 14. Later, Jesus found him at the temple and said to him, "See, you're well again. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you." Hello. You don't want to hear Jesus say that to you, do you? Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had made him well. Can you believe that? This guy has been sick for 38 years. He can't walk. Jesus healed the man, and the guy turned around and told on him. He went to the Pharisees who were giving him a hard time and said, "It's that guy's fault that I'm well." Can you believe that? Isn't that crazy? I guess he didn't like Jesus pointing out his sin to him, maybe. I've known some people like that too. Now, with that story in mind, I want to jump to the other story I was telling you about. It's found in Mark chapter 10. It says, as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. Here's another man with a desperate need. He's just doing the best that he knows how to do. He's sitting by the side of the road with all the other people who have problems that make them defined by their problem and cause them to be a beggar. The only way he could survive was to spend his days begging for change. He's just doing what all the other blind men in town would do. But then Jesus came by. It says, when Bartimaeus heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man over. They said, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and he came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." Here it is again. Jesus asks a question that seems obvious. Anybody have any question what it was Bartimaeus wanted? He's a blind man. Obviously, he wanted to see. Everybody that knew Bartimaeus knew what his need was. Everybody knew what his problem was, and they knew what the desire of his heart was. But still, Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do?" Jesus wanted him to say it out loud. Jesus asked him to say it out loud, just like he asked the man at the pool of Bethesda, "Do you want to be healed?" And let me ask you a question. Have you articulated to the Lord just what it is you want him to do in your life? Have you begun to ask him what it is that you'd like to see happen in your life? Have you begun to specifically ask him to move those things that have you all tied up in knots and have you worried, those things that you keep bringing to the Lord? Have you asked him to do anything specific? Or have you just been telling him your problems? Have you been asking for help? James 4 says, "You do not have because you do not ask. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with the wrong motives." God wants you to ask for his help. He wants you to ask in faith. He wants you to ask with a pure heart. He wants you to ask. He wants you to have enough faith to say it out loud. And that's what happened here. Bartimaeus asked for healing. And here's what Jesus said. Go, your faith has healed you. Now maybe what you're wondering what my point is in sharing these two stories. What do these two things have to do with each other? Well, here it is. Both of these men were healed for one simple reason. They found themselves in the presence of Jesus. They found themselves in the presence of Jesus. That was what hope they had. They found themselves in the presence of Jesus. And that's always the key. Jesus is the healer. Jesus is the deliverer. Whatever you need, Jesus is the key. He's the answer. And you know what? There are no shortcuts. Jesus is the key to what ails you. Jesus is the answer to that problem that you've been carrying, and there's no other solution. Do you need healing? Get yourself into the presence of Jesus. Get there as often as you can. Get there as consistently as you can. Get into the presence of Jesus. Do you need to be set free from addiction? Is there something that's got a hold on you? Get yourself into the presence of Jesus. Do you want to see somebody that you love set free? Get them into the presence of Jesus. Any way you can, get people around you into the presence of Jesus. Now, I know that I say this a lot, and maybe some of you say, okay, Pastor Brad, we're going to get in the presence of Jesus. But I have to tell you, this is the most important thing that I know of. And here's an obvious truth that many people don't really want to hear anymore. The most reliable place that you can experience the presence of Jesus is in His church. It's in His church. I love the fact that we, for the past several weeks during this summer, have had so many out-of-town guests. We have a couple of different sets of out-of-town guests today. People that are here in Nashville spending some time for different reasons. And on Sunday morning, they looked up a place to come to church. Do that because being in the presence of God's people and being in the presence of Jesus as we worship together has become a habit for them. And I got to say, that's one of the most important keys that I know of. Our goal, I said earlier at Oak Hill, is to make sure that people experience a friendly and loving church and that people experience God's presence here. That's our goal every time we meet. And the most important thing I can urge you to do is come to church. Now, I know that sounds self-serving and it sounds like Christianity 101, but so many people are letting this part of their lives slip these days. Yes, there are other spiritual disciplines. Reading your Bible is very important. Praying is very important. Sharing your faith is very important. But attending the fellowship of believers is at the starting point of spiritual disciplines. Church is the starting point. Jesus promised that He'd be with us when we gather in His name. For where two or three gather in my name, there I'm with them. And to that you say, well, isn't the presence of Jesus with me all the time, Pastor Brad? Can't I just experience the presence of Jesus in my house by myself? Sure you can. Absolutely. The presence of Jesus can fill the room anywhere that you are. But there is an exceptional and powerful expression of God's presence that happens in a unique way when we gather in His name. You can't experience it in any other way. It's the gathering of believers. You need to be a part of God's family. You need to worship Him together with His people. You need to hear the Word and let it challenge your heart. Now, I realize I'm preaching to the choir. Y'all are here. It's Labor Day weekend and y'all are in church. But there are some people that are going to see this message online. There's some people who maybe haven't been to church in a long, long time. And I want you to know that being a part of the family of God is very, very important. Get yourself to the house of God. Get your kids to the house of God. Don't let that priority slip. Stay connected to God's family. Being a part of what God is doing among His people, that's where it all starts. The church is the gathering of the believers. It's who we are. It's what the word means. Ecclesia means gathering. Do you know what I've never heard anybody say? I've never heard anybody say, boy, God's been doing an incredible work in my life since I quit going to church. I've never heard anybody say that in my life. Nobody's ever said, that's the key. I quit going to church. Nobody has ever told me, you know what's been the key to my spiritual growth? Getting less involved in church. I was just going to Bible study way too much. Never heard that. Nobody's ever said, boy, when we started making a bigger priority out of going to the lake, God really started moving in my life. Skipping church more has just drawn our family so much closer to God. Never heard anybody say that. And you know why? Because it'll never be true. You need the connection with God's family because Jesus promised that he'd be with us when we gather in his name. He'd be with us in a special way, and he is. Miracles happen in the presence of Jesus. So that's the first thing. Both of these men found themselves in the presence of Jesus, and because of that, both men received their healing. That was the common denominator. But here's the second thing that I want you to see. Both men experienced a miracle, but only one man recognized his moment. Both men experienced a miracle, but only one man recognized his moment. For the man beside the pool, what should have been a life-changing moment ended up just being a great thing that happened to him. It was a cool story to tell. You won't believe it. I was laying there by the pool. I've been laying there 38 years, and this guy came by and told me to pick up my mat, and all of a sudden I could walk. Isn't that amazing? Wow, we're so happy for you. But it didn't seem like that the miracle changed his heart. The condition he suffered with for 38 years was instantly cured. But as soon as it was over, he went to the Pharisees to tell on Jesus for healing him. How ungrateful could one person be? And much like the man at the pool, Bartimaeus found himself in the right place at the right time. He was just sitting there by the road. He didn't know that Jesus was coming by, but that's where he was. Jesus was passing his way. But his miracle didn't just happen because Jesus was passing his way. His miracle happened because Bartimaeus knew this was his moment. And when you realize that Jesus is close enough to heal, able to heal, and willing to heal, that's when you'll decide to do whatever it takes to seize your moment. When you realize that he's there, when you realize that he's able, when you realize that he's willing, that's when you'll decide to do whatever it is you have to do to see yourself healed. Bartimaeus decided if he went home at the end of this day and still couldn't see, it wasn't going to be because he didn't try. He wasn't going to let his moment pass him by. This was his moment, and he wasn't about to let Jesus pass by without getting his attention. He knew that this part of it was up to him. He knew that this part of his miracle was up to him. He knew nobody else was going to take him to Jesus. Nobody else was going to help him get to the front of the line. Nobody else was going to make his moment happen for him. So he just did the only thing he could think of to do. He just started yelling. I love that. He just started yelling. He didn't know any other way. He wasn't going to be able to get Jesus' attention anyway, so he just started yelling as loud as he could. He was going to make sure Jesus heard him. He wasn't going to let anybody talk him down. Oh, they tried. Be quiet, Bartimaeus. They were trying. But he wasn't about to let his moment slip by. He said, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Now here's the thought that I want to leave with you today. When you're going through a season of trouble, sickness, pain, turmoil, when you realize that you need a miracle, there are two ways that you can approach it. There's a choice that you have to make. We all have to make a choice. You can be like the man lying by the pool, telling yourself how unfair your life is. You can spend all your time asking yourself, when will my moment finally come? When will it be my turn? And you never know, your moment may come. Jesus may just wander by one day and decide to heal you. Or you can make a decision to be like Bartimaeus. You can get as close to Jesus as you can and cry out to him until something happens. Just cry out to him until something happens. The man by the pool didn't have any faith, and he still got his miracle. He didn't deserve to be healed, but he still got his miracle. But you know what? As far as we know, that man's the only person who was healed at the pool of Bethesda that day. It was a 1 in a million moment. Jesus happened to be there, but Bartimaeus was different. His situation was different. Bartimaeus knew one thing: Jesus was close by. This was his chance. This was his proximity to Jesus moment. His proximity to Jesus, he saw it as his opportunity to be healed because Bartimaeus believed in Jesus. He believed in Jesus. And let me ask you, do you believe Jesus can fix your problem? Do you really believe that Jesus can make everything new? Do you really believe that Jesus can heal you of that disease? Do you really believe that he can heal your family? That he can change your financial world? Do you really believe that he can do whatever he wants to do and everything in your life can change? I've come here today to tell you this. If you need a miracle, you should do exactly what Bartimaeus did. You should get as close to Jesus as you can, and you should cry out to him in faith. Get as close to Jesus as you can and cry out to him in faith. It's like the old song says, reach out and touch the Lord as he goes by. You will find he's not too busy to hear your heart's cry. He's passing by this moment, your need to supply. Reach out and touch the Lord as he goes by. And for some of you, the problem has been you can easily recognize your need. There's no question what you need. Just like Bartimaeus, you know exactly what you need. The problem is you haven't felt the urgency to get close enough to Jesus to cry out to him. You haven't felt a sense of urgency in your heart to change your priorities enough. And when do we change? When do we find the will to change? We find the will to change when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. That's when we change. Get as close to Jesus as you can and cry out for help. Your marriage seems broken today. Seem like there's big problems and you don't know how to fix them. The more you talk about it, the worse it gets. Get as close to Jesus as you can and cry out for his help. Have your finances seem hopelessly broken and you have no idea what to do? It seems like a hopeless situation. Get as close to Jesus as you can. Cry out for his help. I can tell you this. Jesus has all the power needed to heal you. He's able to heal you, and he's willing to heal you. He's right here in this place. Jesus, I pray for my friends today, God. There's some people that'll see this, Lord, that they've been struggling with the same thing for so long that it's become like a pet in their life. It's been around for so long. It's just part of life. And they've got their story. The reason why things are the way they are. And it's allowed them to become like that man lying there by the pool that day. It's become their identity. And I hear your spirit saying, do you want to be healed? Do you want your life to change? And our answer is yes, God. We want to be healed. We want our lives to change. We want to see a breakthrough and a miracle in our lives. It's what our hearts are crying for. So we cry out to you, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. If you need something from the Lord this morning, I just want to ask you to stand there at your seat where you are. Just stand as a sign to say, here I am, Lord. I'm asking for your help. I'm crying out just like Bartimaeus. I need your help.